This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. It's round 8 and we are back reviewing yet another loss. You know how we roll. It's a jam-packed episode, all the usual stuff. We'll talk about team selection, story of the game, go through some positives and negatives, chat quickly about the VFL, look at news from the week, look ahead to the next week. We've got North Podium, so it's all here. Another cold, sad night at Marvel Stadium, and plenty to talk about. So we'll start with team selection and 4 changes this week, actually. So a couple of things starting to change its selection, which is great. I think we had some really nice consistency at the start of the year, and you can see that the selection committee is starting to fiddle around and try and find something that works. All 4 of these players were omitted. So Lazaro, Newen, Wilfill, and Dylan Stephens were omitted. It's pretty hard to argue with any of those, really. Wilfill had an awful game last week. Lazaro was really struggling to have an impact up forward, out of position. Biggie Newen had a couple of games where he wasn't much chop. And Dylan Stephens has really struggled for consistency within matches and really struggled to find the footy, to be honest. So I couldn't really argue with any of them. In came Jackson Archer for his first game for the year. Jaden Stevenson back in, Toby Pink and Liam Shields. And Toby Pink actually ended up being the sub, which I thought was an interesting decision. He ended up playing forward when he did come on in the third quarter, interestingly enough. So I don't know if it was the plan for him to be sub all along, or if we were a little bit caught out by the size of the St Kilda side and we thought maybe we didn't need him as an extra tall, which is interesting given we were pretty undersized in that defence. But yeah, anyway, I guess, I don't mind experimentation. I thought it was an odd choice to play Aiden Corr as the sub at one point last year. And I certainly thought Pink was an odd choice for sub, but we'll talk about it. When he came on, he was actually pretty handy in the limited minutes he got. Jackson Archer is a fantastic selection. It's great that we're able to get him in and to play a lockdown role. I'm not sure that Steve-O really earned a recall, but we do need some actual forwards in that forward line. I don't think having Powell and Lazaro play heavy minutes there was successful, so I kind of get it from a team balance perspective. And Liam Shields was coming in to fill that Dylan Stephens role and hopefully be a cool head. I don't really necessarily think that he had a great game, so some pros and cons from team selection, but what I do appreciate is that we're trying some different things, and I don't think we as fans can really be too upset by that. I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you in fact, have caught up with the score. We lost to St Kilda 103-65, a 38-point loss, and after a pretty solid first quarter, the Saints really pushed out to a lead in the second quarter and weren't really ever challenged seriously after that point. We did get a couple of good run-ons, but nothing to write home about that was really going to challenge them after half-time. Story of the game, I thought, interestingly, the backline held up quite well despite the midfield really being dominated and us just being completely incapable of hitting a target by hand or foot, which is not a new thing for us this year. Any North Melbourne fan would know that we've watched many a ball kicked in such a way that the teammate trying to receive it just has no chance. We've butchered it. Yeah, I thought, given that and given the amount of time the ball spent in the forward line of the forward half of the ground for the Saints, I thought our defence held up pretty well. Aiden Corr, who I'll talk about shortly, played a really good game against Max King, and we were super undersized, to be honest. They had Max King in there, they had Tim Membry, they had Hayes, and then they had Marshall kind of rotate through there. And really, we had Aiden Corr there, we had Charlie Common as our tallest defender, and then it was Jackson Archer and Luke McDonald trying to pick up the rest of them. So, yeah, I thought our defence held up quite well. It was really interesting seeing Archer in there as a lockdown medium small defender. I thought he did a fantastic job as well. But yeah, that midfield dominance by the Saints was a real challenge. And I think we've seen this week after week that on paper we think that we've got this really developing strong midfield, but I think what we're finding out is that in order to have a really strong midfield, they need to be mature bodies, and our only real mature body in there is LDU. We know that Simpkins rolling through there, but LDU is the constant in there that is a strong, mature body. And around him, we've got players like Powell and Wardlaw who are still developing. And last week we had Willfill. Lazzaro's been there a little bit earlier in the year as well. So all of these are those younger, smaller bodies that just aren't able to get done against someone like Jack Steele, who, is a massive unit in the midfield. But I'm just going to roll through some stats here that kind of tell the story of that midfield dominance. It was inside 50s, 63-38 in St Kilda's favour. The Saints had 60 more disposals overall. They won the contested possession count by 14. They had 128 marks to our 69, which probably shows you the amount of control of the ball that we did not have as compared to what the Saints have. We just weren't able to play the game at a pace that we want to play at all. We weren't able to mark it and set up. I'd be interested to have a look at where those marks took place, but because I'd imagine there'd be a pretty high percentage of them that were in our defensive 50, and then as we went further up the ground, I think it really spread out. We really struggled to find a target. It's been consistent, and I say it every week, but we struggled to find a target outside of our defensive 50 when we were exiting, and I think that's going to be a year-long problem just with the players that we have, but we're absolutely dominated in the marks. We lost the clearances 40-32. So all of that is to say that the Saints just really dominated the ball, and as a result, the ball spent a lot more time in their half the ground, and they were able to convert those opportunities to goals. Not super efficiently. They were about as efficient as us, but when you've got that amount of the ball, it's going to happen. Like they had 28 scoring shots to our 15, and I think that's probably a pretty fair reflection of the kind of dominance they had in terms of territory. Fisher had a lot of trouble getting it out, and I think moving Sheasel out of being a full-time defender had pros and cons this week. I'll talk about Sheasel a little bit later, but Fisher was really the man trying to drive the ball out, and at times it just looked like he was trying to make things happen that weren't there. We just were not able to take that lead-up mark or a contested grab on the wing. I thought Eddie Ford was missed this week. Zane Dersma wasn't able to get up the ground and take those bailout marks. We don't have a second tool, so if Larky's not doing it, which ideally he's not, there's no 195 plus player coming out of the forward 50 to take a grab. We know that Xerri is not a marking player. He again went without a mark, which I think is a challenge for a ruckman. It just means that we have to play a certain way because he's not going to be able to bail us out. It's just not his game. So that was the story of the game for me, just territory dominated by the Saints, and whilst we were relatively efficient when the ball did go forward, there was certainly just not enough of the ball getting there. And the second half of the first quarter and the second quarter, it was all one-way traffic to the Saints, and the scoreboard reflected that. It was another tough watch, certainly some more positives than there were from the past couple of weeks, but it was another game where I sat there watching it about 15, 20 minutes through the second quarter and went, all right, well, we're not winning again, so what else can I look for, essentially? Let's look at the 5 stars, who's going to be on that North podium. And there were some impressive performances this week. I think for me it was a pretty easy best on ground for our side, and that was George Wardlaw. 22 disposals, 1 goal, 2, 3 marks, 4 tackles, a couple of clearances, 3 inside 50s, 5 intercepts. And, you can see from the statistics that he did a little bit of everything. He wasn't a massive accumulator, but 22 is on the higher side for him. What he did do was impact every contest that he had an opportunity to, and I think this was one of those games where he kind of put enough of those moments together for me to say that he's had a really good game. I thought at times earlier in the year he's had those moments of impact, but he's drifted in and out of the game. But he had a fantastic game. He put his body on the line a couple of times, a massive hit in the middle of the ground. He kicked that goal that came from a Xerri clearance hit the pack at the perfect front and centre that you get taught as a junior, and ran on and kicked the goal, and just had that absolute animalistic determination to win the ball when it was there to be won, which is something that's sorely lacking from a lot of our players. And I think that's part of the reason that it looks so impactful and so distinct when he's doing it, because the players around him and what we've been used to the past couple of years, it's just not there. So, yeah, I thought it was a pretty complete game from George. Still had a couple of little errors, particularly some 50-metre penalties that he gave away. But all in all, I thought he was our most impactful and positive player on the day. Really brought the rest of the team with him. And, I think this sort of game I'm really hoping will become his benchmark over the next couple of years. We know he's super young. We know he starts to develop his tank. And right now, I'm not in a position where I'm expecting him to do this every week. But I'd love him to get to a point where that is more realistic. So, yeah, definitely 4 votes for Georgie Wardlaw. Second person up, 3 votes, Colby McKercher. So 2 of our young guns I thought were best on. McKercher had 30 disposals, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 579 metres gained, which was the most for us. 8 intercepts, went at 90% disposal efficiency. So, yeah, a really consistent game for the Kirch, particularly in that first quarter. I thought he was phenomenal. Did a couple of really good things, and it was great to see McKercher and Sheasel and Wardlaw combining through the middle of the ground, particularly, as I said, in that first quarter. Had a couple of fantastic runs, and really tried to help Zach Fisher driving the ball out of defence. I thought Fisher's, from this game, it kind of felt like Fisher was the deepest, and then McKercher was the next one up. 30 touches for the Kirch, and I thought he was probably our most consistent performer in terms of trying to drive that ball out of defensive 50. Had a couple of great passages through the middle of the ground and down the wing, and I thought just another great game from the Kirch. So fantastic to have 2 of our young guns in those best on ground spots. The 2 votes I've given to Tristan Xerri, 19 disposals, 11 tackles, which was the most on the ground, 8 clearances, 40 hitouts, 7 of which were to advantage, 16 contested possessions, also the most on the ground, and just really dominated in the ruck. Rowan Marshall, we know, is a fantastic ruckman, and this is the second time this year that Xerri's really put him to the sword after that practice game down in Moorabbin. Yeah, I thought Xerri overall played a fantastic game. Did have a couple of ruckman moments. He had 7 clangers, which again was most on the ground, so definitely room for improvement and not a flawless game, not his best game for the year, but it's hard to say that he didn't smash Rowan Marshall. And I thought, whilst I think there's some fans that get frustrated with him taking it out of the ruck, it must be an instruction, because he's doing it week after week, and we know that Clarko would have told him not to by this point if he didn't want him doing that. It seems as though if he thinks he's going to be able to grab it because for whatever reason he's out-positioned or the other ruckman's late to the contest, he's happy to just grab it, and then if he gets grabbed and it's a repeat, he'll live with it. Otherwise, he'll grab it and throw it in the boot and thrust it forward. And I think 8 times out of 10, I think it comes off. The times it doesn't come off, he does look silly, but I think I'll take those odds. He's just the perfect ruckman if you're looking for a grunt, tackling, physical. He's got kind of some Shane Mumford about him. When he hits someone, they really stay hit. As I mentioned earlier, I'd love him to add some marking to his game, but I mean, looking at the way that he plays at the moment, I probably think we have to accept that, he's got a ceiling for marking. It's not going to be something... He's not going to turn himself into an elite marking ruckman. I just think he needs to add some of that to his game. But, yeah, he tried his heart out again. I'm loving this season from Tristan Xerri, and I think we're seeing the development that we thought we were going to get from him last year when his season was really cut down at the knees with that round 1 injury. I think we could have seen a lot of this from him last year if not for that injury. So it's fantastic that he's finally able to prove some of those haters wrong. A fantastic game from Xerri with some flaws. And then 1 vote, it might be an unpopular opinion, but I've given it to Aidan Corr. His stats don't jump off the page. 16 disposals, 4 marks, 1 of which was contested, 2 tackles, 9 intercepts, 3 spoils. You look at that and it's a pretty solid game, but he completely shut Max King out of the game. King had 1 goal, 1 mark, 7 touches. That 1 goal came from a free kick that Corr gave away. Must have been Q1, I think. And then after that, he was unsighted. I thought Corr did a fantastic job just blanketing him, taking him out of those dangerous spots. And it was a team effort down there. Like, Corr was obviously the number one attached player, but Comben helped out, McDonald helped out. It wasn't just Aiden Corr, but I thought based on how Corr's been playing earlier on in the year, we know he's had quite a rough start to the season. I thought his aggression at the footy was fantastic. There was a couple of times where he just absolutely went hell for leather at the ball when it was there to be won and came out with it. We know that, similar to Xerri, like we know that Corr has limitations. We know that he's not super tall and he's being asked to play, in this case, the number one defender role, which is not something that I think is well suited to him in an ideal world. We know that he's prone to a mistake or two, but I thought holistically he absolutely shut King out of the game. And in a game where the ball spent so long in St Kilda's forward 50, for them to only end up with 103 points on the board and for King to only kick 1 goal shows that Corr was not only doing his job, but it wasn't at the expense of another star forward getting off the chain. Which I think is sometimes the case down back for us. We're able to shut one down, but the rest of them have a field day. So, yeah, I thought Corr was fantastic, and it was great to see him have a bit of a bounce back after, what can only be described as a pretty average start to the season. In terms of other players that were in with a chance, I thought similarly Comben had a pretty good game down back. Luke McDonald was really solid. Jackson Archer was really solid in his first game for the year. A bit of a trend there with 3 of the defenders in with a shot. And I thought in terms of the forwards, look, Cam Xerri at one point was in the votes. He kicked 3 goals. It was touch and go between him and Corr for the 1 vote. It's really hard to assess forwards on a day like this because they just get so little opportunity. So Xerri's 3 goals came from 6 touches. I think probably if you're going to have that few disposals and you're going to kick 3 goals, if you want to get into the votes, you might need a goal assist or a couple more score involvements, which wasn't to be for Cam. So he's probably the most unlucky. I think it's great that he was able to hit the scoreboard again, Xerri, but I just need to see a little bit more from him up in that forward line because whether that's up the ground or, as I said, dishing a few off, I think, that's probably what was missing from him getting in the votes. So Wardlaw 4, McKercher 3, Xerri 2, Aiden Corr 1. And in terms of the best opposition player, I know I've probably done this every second week and I've just said I couldn't split them, but Jack Sinclair and Bradley Hill just smashed us. Sinclair off half-back and then pushing through the middle. Bradley Hill through the middle of the ground. Wanganeen Miller I also could have put in there. Just smashed us with the run and carry through the middle, made us look slow and pedestrian and like we were going backwards at times. So between the two of them, I would expect one of them to get the 3 votes on Brownlow night. I thought they were both fantastic. And Brad Hill just shows us the sort of player that we're missing on a wing. We've seen Bailey Scott do that at times last year, probably not as damaging as Brad Hill can be. Let's be honest, Brad Hill's a really good winger. But yeah, just showed us what we're missing, what we're hoping someone like Dylan Stephens could become, but we have not seen anything like that from him this year. So Sinclair and Hill, the 2 best on for the Saints. The current North Podium standings haven't changed in terms of the position from last week. Sheasel still on top with 18, Xerri with 14, Powell with 10. So Xerri has just closed the gap slightly on Shees. And then LDU still on 9. McKercher has moved on into equal 5th with Paul Curtis on 6 votes. So that's what it looks like. It's also the first game for the year that Shees has not got a vote. And I think, I'll talk about that, but he got moved around. He probably played, I don't know. In fact, I won't even guess the percentages, but he played in all 3 areas of the ground. Probably something like 40% of the time in the midfield. And he's still got plenty of the ball, but just didn't have the same impact that he would have when he's off half-back. So it wasn't a bad game by Shees. He'd probably be next, maybe our 7th, 8th best player, something like that. but just wasn't able to have the same impact as he does off the halfback flank. And to be honest, I don't mind him, if we lose a little bit of his impact, but we get to expose him to different areas of the ground. I don't think that's a bad thing. So, yeah, not a bad game by Shees. He still sits well out on top of the North podium, and we'll see how the rest of the season plays out in that area. Before we jump into the positives and negatives, just a quick reminder to share me out with any North Melbourne fans that you know, subscribe on your chosen podcast service and give me a review if you can. Find me on social media at NorthPodShow. And I'd also like to give a massive thank you to Rousseauit118. I apologise if I haven't pronounced that username correctly. I've tried my best. He contributed to my Buy Me a Coffee. So thank you so much for that, Rousseauit118. If you would like to buy me a coffee, you can find the link in the show notes in order to support the show. Let's look at the negatives first. I think it's very easy for me to come up with some negatives like it is most weeks, so this was not a problem. This is a new negative from us, and I'm not saying this to give him a hard time. It's just how it was. Nick Larkey had a shocker. Really ruined some of our forward momentum a couple of times, dropped some marks that he'd absolutely usually gobble up. There was particularly one higher up the ground. It was free in the middle of the ground. Would have taken the mark maybe 70 metres out from our defensive goal, and then we would have been out the back, and just dropped it under really no pressure. Dropped a couple in the forward line as well. Missed a shot that he normally wouldn't miss. He did end up clunking a couple and kicked 2 goals in the last quarter, but I thought in terms of his impact, he was a net negative, unfortunately. Just had one of those games. Dougal Howard played him really well up to 3/4 time, and it was just unfortunate. Some days you have those days, 1 or 2 things go wrong at the start of the match and your confidence is low, and I think that's what happened for him. And as I said, it just really killed our momentum going forward at times. We don't get a lot of the ball forward, so when we kick it inside and it's a decent kick to him and he drops a chest mark and it goes the other direction, it really hurts. So unfortunate that Larkey had a bit of a shocker. It also allowed Wilkie to play on Xerri and really help out the other defenders. I really rate Wilkie as a defender. I think he's a really tough matchup. So the fact that he was able to play off Xerri at times, who sure did kick 3 goals, but had minimal impact aside from that, I thought made it life tough for some of our other forwards as well. So yeah, just a rough game from Larkey. Hopefully he bounces back. The fact that in the last quarter he was able to kick a couple of goals, I think definitely helps, because there's nothing worse than going into an away game having kicked none at home the previous week. So yeah, hopefully Larkey can bounce back, but he really, really hurt us, unfortunately. This statistic is the one that I think sums up one half of our massive problem at the moment. We had 0 tackles inside 50 for the whole game. And I think, that forward half pressure and keeping the ball inside our forward half when it gets there is the one half of our biggest problem. The other biggest problem is that we're just not winning the ball and getting it down there in the first place. But to have not a single tackle inside 50 for the whole 120 odd minutes is, I don't even know how it happens. Like, it's pretty easy for there to be a ball up inside your forward 50 as a result of a bit of a scuffle, and then, an opposition player ends up with the ball and you tackle them. Like, that's not tricky. To give you an idea of how that happens, Larkey and Dersma didn't have a tackle all day. Simkin and Curtis had 1 tackle each. Xerri and Jaden Stevenson had 2 tackles each. Now, obviously, those 5 tackles, 6 tackles must have occurred outside the forward 50. Go figure. But the fact that those, as our probably main forwards, Sheasel went through there, Blake Xerri went through there, like they had a couple more tackles than that, but those 6 are probably the ones that spent the most of the time forward, and for them to have so few tackles and to have none inside 50, what can you say? I think I spoke about it in a couple of podcasts earlier on. We've got an issue where we've got too much aggressive offensive talent in there and not enough just grunt work, unfortunately. I think Blake Xerri brings a bit of that, but Sheasel probably doesn't. He again is that classy, not a super high tackler when they're rolling through. Larkey, probably you don't expect him to be giving too many tackles. He had a couple of great chases, don't get me wrong, he tries. But I do think there's an issue in that forward line because given Larkey is our only tall forward, in theory, it should mean that we've got more pressure and chaos being created by our smalls and our mediums, but it's just not the case. We are not going to win a game of football if our midfield continues to perform the way it has been and our forward line pressure looks like this. It's just not going to happen. At least one of, if not both of those things need to be addressed before we win a game. And sure, we might catch an opposition in a tough spot, but I really hope and I would have to think that our forward half coaches would have to be addressing this with the players because, yeah, for Dersma to have none, Simkin and Curtis one, Xerri and Stevo to have two each, it's not good enough for those mediums and smalls. And to have none inside forward 50, as I said, you can see it visually at the ground. If we do not take the mark inside 50, it slingshots out there so fast. It must be so satisfying for the opposition to watch it because it makes them look very good, but generally speaking, it's a reflection of our inability to tackle, to pressure, to corral effectively. And I think that's sometimes it looks like our forward line's putting on some decent pressure because they're corralling, but that corralling's not putting enough pressure on the disposal. And we saw that from our players. Often at times during this game, there was a lot of pressure being applied to our disposals, and it meant that we had sloppy handball to sloppy kick to dump kick. And that's the kind of pressure that we need being applied to the opposition, but we're just not capable of it at the moment. Third and final main negative, there's just so many little things that we still aren't getting right across the entirety of the ground and across the whole game. I mentioned that Xerri had a couple of clangers. There was at least one major defensive lapse where the ball was kicked in long and he just missed the opportunity to go up and contest, and Hayes took an uncontested mark 30 metres out directly in front. Whether or not that's a miscommunication or Xerri just not knowing when to go, I don't know, but he looks a little uneasy when he gets dragged into defensive 50. Similarly, Xerri handballed to Shees at one point and it just wasn't on. Like one or both of them need to look and know that's not on. I don't think it's fair just to put that on Xerri because Shees must have called for it and then was immediately under pressure and had to do a sideways kick to get out of trouble, and it ended up being turned over as you'd expect. We gave away some silly 50-metre penalties that just killed any drive and momentum that we had going at those points. You could argue with maybe one of them that probably wasn't there, but at the same time, there's margins with which we have to play in. And I think if you're putting yourselves in these situations where it's going to be a 50-50, if it's a 50-metre penalty, there's a play on words or a word combination that doesn't really work. I just think we're playing with fire. Anyone knows that the side that's playing better or that's more skillful will get the rub of the green holistically because it's confirmation bias. You're kind of expecting the team that's worse to make some mistakes. And I think we saw a little bit of that. I thought that Shields came in, and for someone who's supposed to be the elder statesman, he was pretty sloppy at times. I mentioned it before, but Fisher appeared to be trying to get that north ball movement going, but didn't appear to be in alignment with the other players because he ended up just having to kick it long down the line after running around in a circle for 10 metres. And a big one that I was able to see because I did get to the game, whereas obviously last week I wasn't able to when it was down in Hobart. We're too slow to cover the opposition switch. Now, I don't know if that's a fitness thing or a strategy thing, but whenever they had it in one back pocket, if they switched it to the other side, we were able to mostly cover those really wide runners that got to the opposite wing, but it was the space that opened up inside the middle of the ground that we weren't able to then cover. It's kind of like the second wave moving across, and that's where Hill and Wangani Miller were able to just waltz through, and they were able to go coast to coast pretty easily at times. That's the sort of stuff that really killed us, and the sort of stuff that I think we could improve on. Like I said, don't know if that's communication, if that's fitness, if that's just not knowing where to be. There's a whole heap of factors that could be, but I do hope that behind the goals vision is being shown at training, because you can just see it, maybe 10 seconds before it occurs. The Saints players just went, and they ended up with players through the middle of the ground free. that I think, we probably, in my mind, from my perfect seat, with my feet up, not working hard at all, I think we had time to cover it if we knew what we were doing. And I think that just speaks to those little things that we just aren't quite getting right across the ground, which Clarko did speak a little bit about in his Q&A, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. Let's have a look at the positives, though. There's certainly were some positives to talk about, and I think it's easy when you're losing week after week just to forget about some of these things, but it's worth mentioning. It was only a 38-point loss, so there were some more positives to draw out of this one, I thought. This one, it's not one that I'd normally go with, but Webster getting booed and then turning it over to Tommy Powell inside 50 for him to kick a goal was my personal highlight. I think the fact that Jimmy Webster came back for this game, it surprised me a little, to be honest. I thought that the Saints would put him through the VFL this week, sort of protect him from what was always going to happen, and then get him back into the AFL side next week. Part of me kind of respects them throwing him to the Wolves, so to speak, and he really struggled with that pressure in the first quarter and a half or so. Jimmy Webster, he had a couple of really bad turnovers. He got booed every time he got the ball. You could hear the Saints fans cheering him to try and counterbalance that. And there was certainly more Saints fans at the ground. Like, go figure, it was a Saints home game and we're playing. But the booing was really hard not to hear. And, in particular, he went for a across-the-goals kick that got intercepted by Tommy Powell, who just went back and slotted it from 45 metres. And that was a real highlight. I'm not a big fan of booing usually, and I think there's not a lot of reasons to boo a play, but Jimmy Webster's incident that he had with Jai Simpkin in the preseason, it was just one of those really ugly moments that we kind of hoped was moving out of or was out of the game. And I think seeing the mind games there at play with the crowd, and you could see the North players getting stuck into him as well, was fantastic. It was great to see us flying the flag for Jai in these moments. Jai himself was getting into Webster a bit, which I liked. It's a goal. It's a moment in a game. It's not a win. The win would be much better. But when you're North Melbourne at the moment, you've got to take moments like that. So it was, in an immature way, pretty satisfying to see that happening to Webster. I do hope, though, that being said, that we've had that game now, and I don't know if we play the Saints again this year, but the next time that we play the Saints, I do hope that we all move on, because, I think it's fine the next game to really try and give it to him, but then, we've had that, let's move on. It's not like there are worse crimes to commit, I suppose, is what I want to say around that. So I've had my immature fun, and now I'm coaching us out of it, but I just think there's balance in everything. That's really all. Second positive, and probably the first real positive, I thought after a rough start with miscommunications and a couple of errors in the defensive 50, the backline functioned really well. I kind of alluded to this in the story of the game. I thought Corr kept King pretty much irrelevant. Charlie Comben manned Tim Membry and Marshall, depending on which of those were there, and did that pretty well and was able to intercept a couple of times. I thought, but in particular, the first half of Charlie Comben was really good. I thought Archer came in for his first game and played a really good defensive game. It's interesting looking at him and Fisher because they're pretty much opposites. If you put the two of them together, you've got a whole player. Archer is just there 100% for what he can do defensively. If he ends up with the footy, let's hope he's handballing it to someone else so they can do something decent with it. And Fisher is the same, except we just want the ball in his hands. We do not want him having to defend at all. And it'll be interesting to see, to what extent we're able to get away with that, because holistically, you have to hide someone on Fisher or you have to cover his players. And similarly, Archer he's not useless on offense, but he's just not bringing anything. He brings absolute dogged defensiveness. He's really, really quick off the mark, which is something that can't be said for a few of our other defenders. So yeah, it was fantastic to get Archer in. I think he definitely deserves to keep his place for a couple of weeks, and probably that Hardiman role is one that I'd like to see rotated through a couple of different players, such as Bergman. I thought McDonald had a really positive game, intercepted a little like Charlie Comben, took a couple of marks running back or putting himself in the hole and was pretty composed with the ball, which is fantastic because similar to Aidan Corr, I think he's had a pretty average start to the season, but the two of them had really promising games, I thought. I mentioned Kirch in the votes. I thought he had a really, really good quarter one and then battled hard all day. We got some more time into Riley Hardiman, although he did come off in the third quarter as a substitute. So, yeah, I think given how tall the Saints were with King and Membry and Hayes and Marshall, plus some pretty handy mid-sized players in Owens and Filippo, I thought it was a great effort to kick their efficiency inside 50 about the same as ours. They were 43%, we were 42%. So we were a little up on where we've been, and the Saints were a little down on where they've been. But yeah, like I said, I think we started a little rough. There was a few miscommunications, but after that, I think holistically, they did pretty much the best job I think we could have expected given the circumstances, given the amount of ball in there. And individually, I think most of them performed really well. It'll be interesting to see what it's like if we're moving Sheasley out of there. To what extent do we need to get another good ball user in there? I don't know. I don't know the answers. I think we can expect to see some more experimentation in the weeks to come. But yeah, I think the balance of the defence in there with Archer in there as an absolute lockdown was really positive. So we would have expected Pink to be a third tall in there, but even when he came on as the sub, he was playing forward and second ruck. So I guess I'll transition to talking about that. We saw some more positional experimentation, which I think is a positive for us at the moment. I just want us to be trying different things, particularly when the game's done and dusted like it was in that last quarter. Our last quarter in general, I thought was really positive. We moved the ball with intent. I think, and again, it's sometimes hard when you're at the game to get a sense for some things, but my feeling was that we just decided to go for it, and as a team we committed to going for it, as opposed to earlier on when I thought Fisher was trying to say let's go for it and his teammates weren't. Yeah, the last quarter was really positive. There was some great ball movement, some great moments where you could see us kind of running as a wave. We were able to get on the end of a couple of marks and actually dictate a bit of play at times. So some real positives there. In terms of the experimentation, like I said, Sheasel played all over the ground. Steve-O, who found it virtually impossible to touch the ball in the first three quarters, was moved up to the wing in the last quarter and, had a bit more impact there. It'll be interesting to see if that's the kind of role that we look to play him in whilst the ball's just not coming down to the forward line, because look, it's not all his fault. He had a bad game, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to tell you that none of it's his fault, but I just think it's a really hard forward line to play in at the moment, and he's one of those players that as a result of that is really struggling. I don't know how I feel about the fact that he got back into the side based on some average VFL form, but yeah, look, I didn't mind his last quarter off the wing. He did a couple of nice things. And then, like I said, Toby Pink playing as that second tall forward. He also went to the ruck for a couple of contests instead of Nick Larkey going up there. And I thought, he didn't look too bad. We know that initially he was drafted as a forward player before he then has turned himself into a key back. And so it's not a completely strange thing to be trying with him. He took a couple of good marks, did a couple of good things. I don't see him as a long-term prospect. I'm not sure that he has the game sense to do it. But look, who knows? Let's give it a crack. I'd much prefer to see him in that second ruck role than I would Larkey. So, yeah, I'd be interested to know if it was a plan ahead of time or not to make him the sub and then do that, or if we were going to try it from the start. He did actually go and play some more time in the VFL the next day, so part of me thinks that it was the plan all along for him to only play a quarter or so and then get some more VFL footy into him. But yeah, given he only played a quarter, I thought he was pretty solid in that forward line second tall option. And that about rounds out the positives and negatives. In terms of other news from the week, there were a couple of news items this week, actually. I'll start with the VFL like I always do. After a slow start, it was a really close loss in the end, 99-96 against Sandringham. We had our chances to win it late, just weren't able to, really coming from behind. And there were some positive performances to speak of. Greenwood had 18 tackles and a goal. I know that he doesn't bring pace in the forward line, but I think it's important if we're having 0 tackles inside 50. I'd love to get someone who can tackle in there, and we know that he can do that. So I do think that he's worth a go in and out of the side. Lazaro and Wilfield had great midfield games. Lazaro, 28 disposals, kicked a goal and 7 clearances. Wilfield, 29 disposals, kicked a goal and 6 clearances. I'd expect both of them to need to bide their time a little bit more, but, good form is what we want from our VFL players. Curtis Taylor actually had a pretty good game, 21 disposals. Eddie Ford kicked 2 goals, so I'd expect him to come back. I reckon we were just being a bit conservative with him. Hansen Jr. kicked 3 goals. Tyler Sellers, 2 goals too. Bergman and Cooper Harvey, we got some more game time into them. So yeah, a few of those I'd expect to be pushing for selection in the next couple of weeks. In particular, Ford, someone like Dersma is the sort of one that I think he's going to get a rest at some point. Whether or not we bring in Hansen Jr. at some point, I don't know if we can play him and Blake Drury, but at the same time, if we're not playing 2 tall forwards, I don't see why we couldn't go a little smaller and try it out, because I'm all for experimentation at the moment. We've got literally nothing to lose. I think Miller Bergman is not far off. I sort of alluded to him earlier. I think Hardiman probably deserves a 3 or 4 game block, and then maybe we try Bergman and see how he goes off halfback. He's a solid, reliable kick. I don't think he is going to break the lines necessarily, but I think he can help retain possession, and he also plays a good defensive role. So, yeah, I think a few of those are likely to push for selection this week. Probably not 4 changes like we saw this week, but 1 or 2 I think wouldn't be out of place. The other 2 pieces of news from the week. Heaps of talk, particularly earlier in the week, about North Melbourne's folding. We're moving up to the northern suburbs. We need to recruit Scott Pendlebury next year because our culture's broken. I am not going to talk about all of those things for a lot of reasons. The main reason is it doesn't interest me, to be honest. I'm more interested in the footy. All I do want to say about it is it's noise. And I think we as fans have to remember that we either buy into the outside noise and we get frustrated or antagonised by it, or we say, great, thanks for your opinion, and we move on. And I think that's where I'm at. I'm not saying that I don't want Scott Pendlebury at the club. What I am saying is it's May and there's a long time to go, and I don't think Scott Pendlebury is likely to want to give up being a one-club player in his situation. So, yeah, a lot of stuff, particularly earlier in the week, I'm not going to talk about it. If you do want to, seek that out and get angry about it, there's plenty of avenues for you to do that. I'd encourage you to go onto the AFL website or go onto the SEN website. You'll find plenty to upset you there. The other thing that was released during the week was the Q&A with Todd Viney and Alistair Clarkson. They had Nat Edwards come on and ask some questions that were submitted by members. It was pretty stock standard, pretty towing the line. We need to stay patient. We've been around a long time. We know how to do this. So there was nothing in there that, really pricked my ears. And it's totally what you'd expect. They're not going to come on there and rag out the players like I think some fans would maybe like them to. They're not going to share all of our secrets. They don't have a lot of currency at the moment just by virtue of the fact that we're not playing well. So there's not a lot that they can actually say that's going to, lift our spirits dramatically. But I think it's positive that they're getting out there and spreading some message. I think whilst I'm not 100% believing that we're on the up, I have to believe that Clarko and Todd have been here before. Well, I know they have. It's easy to forget how long Hawthorn took to get to that point where they were winning 3 premierships in a row. Obviously, we know they won that 2008 one that was a little early, but 3 or 4 years prior to that, it was a real slog. So I know I say it every week. To us fans, it feels like it's been forever. Clarko's in year 2, so I totally get how he can come across as more patient than maybe we are as fans, and I think it's absolutely reasonable. It's just the way it is. So, yeah, as I say, I still feel like this year is the bottom, and we can start rising starting next year. I know that's hard to swallow for fans, but I do think that's where we're at. And I think if we're not on the rise next year, that's when we can start panicking. And when I say rise, I don't mean, rising into the 8. I just mean winning a couple more games. So yeah, that's the news. As you can tell, I'm not super interested in the outside noise, and that's why I'm just focusing on what's happening on the ground. In terms of next week, we've got Saturday night, which might make you think, gee, we're, prime time. What's it going to be? We're playing in Darwin against the Gold Coast. So as far as Saturday night games go, it's as far away from prime time as you could get. Traditionally, they've been a bit of a bogey team for us, but we know that we did beat them in our last game of last year. So hopefully we get that version and not the version of North Melbourne Gold Coast games where Gary Ablett has 40 disposals, kicks 3 goals, and we get smashed. If we want to look at the positive side, we've got an extra day recovery from them. They're only playing Brisbane on Sunday, so that extra day, hopefully that gives us something. You can tell that I'm wanting to be pretty optimistic about that, but I think playing in Darwin against the Gold Coast is tough. Darwin has similar kinds of conditions to the Gold Coast. It's going to be humid and warm. It's obviously a much smaller ground, just in terms of the stadium around it, so it could be quite windy. Yeah, I don't go in with high expectations just because of all of those factors that I've talked about, but I think we're a chance. I'm just looking to see more of those positive signs. I think the midfield battle is going to be really tough again. Gold Coast's midfield with Rowell and Anderson and Miller, just to name, their sort of best 3, I think is going to be really tough for our smaller bodies. But another great education for Wardlaw and McKercher if he goes through there. Tommy Powell. So, yeah, I think looking at what their midfield looks like is something that we can look forward to in the next couple of years, because that Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson draft was, several years ago now, and that's why they're in a position where they've got quite an elite midfield. Another really tall forward line to contend with, another king to contend with, Ben this time. Hopefully I've got through this podcast without calling the wrong king the wrong name. I often just mix up their names. I do realise they're different players and who plays for who. But yeah, with King down there and the Jed Walter up there as the number 3 pick from last year. Number 3, I think, because we took Colby at number 2. Yeah, we're going to be undersized down there again. We're going to be undersized most weeks. I look with interest to see if we back in what we've done this week and we take in a smaller defence that would have, say, Corr playing on Ben King and then Comben playing on Jed Walter, or if we do want to bring in Toby Pink or Biggie Newen for that third tall. I probably expect us to stay the same. I don't know that, but I just think the Gold Coast are a little smaller in terms of they don't really have a third that's going to damage us, I don't think. So I think you probably could live with the 3. Anyway, with the 2, sorry. Anyway, I don't know. It's going to be another interesting game. We're getting dangerously close to our bye now in terms of going winless to the bye, which I think it's important that we try and steal one before then. Let me look at who we've got before that just quickly. So we've got Gold Coast, then Essendon, then Port Adelaide. So we've got 3 matches before our bye. On paper, you'd have to say that the Suns are our best chance at getting a win before the bye, unfortunately. So hopefully we can get the win in Darwin. I don't feel confident that we will, but as North Melbourne fans, as Clarko said to us in the Q&A, we've just got to keep finding those little positives like Colby, McKercher, like George Wardlaw's game. I probably didn't give him enough airtime on this podcast. He had a really, really promising game. So we've got to keep looking for those positives. And yeah, we hope that we're able to put together a couple of wins this season. And if not, we wallow in sadness because we've gotten pretty good at doing that over the past couple of seasons. I hope everyone has a fantastic week. I say it every week. I hope that everyone, even if we're having an awful time around the football right now, I hope we're having a great time elsewhere. I will speak to you, of course, sometime after the Gold Coast game. And yeah, as always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.